A cold desert wind swept across the open plains as dawn crawled over the horizon, and James Rowley, called Jr. by everyone who knew him, stood outside his weather-beaten cabin, wondering how a life so quiet could feel so heavy. He'd come to the edge of Arizona territory to escape the noise of the world, but somehow, silence had only made his loneliness louder, and that emptiness was the reason he noticed the faint sound of a wagon wheel groaning across the flats. He squinted into the rising sun until a shape slowly formed, a small wagon pulled by a tired horse and guided by a lone Apache woman, her shoulders tense, her face pale with worry, the wheel visibly crooked and wobbling toward collapse. Instinct moved him before thought could catch up. "Ma'am, that wheel's about to snap," he called, stepping forward with his hands open, palms showing peace, because he knew the world she came from did not trust easily, especially not a white cowboy standing on the edge of her path. She studied him carefully, her eyes sharp but exhausted, and after a long moment she nodded once, a gesture of both caution and need. He approached slowly, knelt beside the splintered wheel, and saw the cracked spokes that would have shattered completely within another mile. When he asked her name, she hesitated, then answered quietly, "Nanala." He told her his, and though they were strangers from worlds that rarely mixed with anything but tension, they worked together seamlessly. He lifted the wagon's corner, bracing it on stones while she steadied the horse. He carved new wedges from mesquite wood, fitting them into the loose joints. She held the spokes with surprising strength while he hammered the last nail from his limited supplies. When the wheel finally settled firm and true, she released a breath that sounded like a burden lifting, and something softened in her face. She opened a small bundle and handed him a strip of dried venison in gratitude, but he shook his head and smiled. "Just being neighborly," he said. In a world divided by lines of fear, suspicion, and bitter history, that simple sentence carried more weight than the mended wheel. Nanala looked at him for a long, searching moment, as if trying to understand why a man with no reason to care had chosen to help her, yet she said nothing more. She simply placed her hand briefly over her heart in a gesture of respect and climbed back onto her wagon. As she rode away, JR watched her shrinking silhouette disappear into the distant buttes, never expecting to see her again. Still, that small encounter stayed with him for the rest of the evening. He felt lighter, as though he had repaired something inside himself as much as he had repaired her wagon. He cooked a simple supper, cleaned his tools, and soon the desert sank into its quiet night, coyotes singing their lonely chorus under a sky heavy with stars. J.R. slept with the comfort of a man who'd done a decent thing, not knowing that kindness often echoes louder than a gunshot, and sometimes it comes back in a way no man can predict. The next morning, he stepped outside with his coffee, stretching lazily, only to freeze where he stood. His cabin was completely surrounded. A full ring of Apache warriors sat on horseback, their faces streaked with war paint, their spears and rifles gleaming in the new sun, their expressions unreadable. The air was so still he could hear his own heartbeat thundering in his chest. One wrong move might end him. He slowly set his coffee down, raising his empty hands. "Boys," he said softly, voice cracking, "if this is about yesterday, I meant no harm." No one answered. The ring did not break. The horses snorted, shifting their weight, hooves crunching lightly against the dry earth. Then the wall of riders opened, and Nanala stepped into the clearing, riding a chestnut mare. She dismounted and walked toward him, her posture steady, her face void of anger or accusation. Instead, there was a solemn respect in her eyes. "You helped me," she said. "Our people do not forget." JR blinked, unsure whether her words were a blessing or a warning. She gestured to the warriors surrounding his cabin. These men watched from far ridges. They saw a stranger show kindness with no expectation of anything in return. "They saw you treat me with dignity. In our traditions, such acts demand acknowledgement." JR exhaled shakily. "Acknowledge, how?" he asked, eyeing the heavily armed circle of riders who seemed far too formidable to have come for a simple thank you. Nanala lifted her chin with quiet pride. "Protection," she answered. "You live alone. There are men traveling this land who would burn your home for a sack of grain, or kill you for the boots on your feet. Last night, scouts saw riders not far from here, men who take what they want. They were heading toward your cabin." JR's stomach tightened. He had seen tracks the day before but thought nothing of them. "Our warriors rode through the night to reach you first," she continued. "A good deed must not be paid with death." JR swallowed hard, overwhelmed by the idea that strangers, people his own society had often wronged, had formed a protective wall around him simply because he had fixed a wagon wheel for a woman he didn't know. He glanced at the warriors, trying to understand them, but what he saw was a depth of loyalty, honor, and cultural principle that ran far deeper than any frontier law. Nanala stepped forward until she stood only a few feet from him. "Kindness given freely is the mark of a strong heart," she said. "Among our people, strong hearts are never left alone." One of the warriors dismounted and approached. He carried a finely crafted spear adorned with colored feathers, symbols Jair did not understand. The warrior planted the spear firmly in the ground beside JR's cabin, then stepped back. Nanala translated softly. "This is a sign. Anyone who sees it will know you are under the protection of the NDE, the Apache. It tells the world that harming you is to make themselves our enemy." JR stared at the spear, stunned. "But, why go to such lengths?" "I only fixed a wheel." Nanala's gaze warmed. "Sometimes, the smallest act reveals the largest truth. You saw a woman in trouble, not an Apache. You acted with humanity, not fear. In a land that has forgotten simple compassion, gestures like yours are rare, and rare things are worth guarding." Before he could respond, the rising wind carried a distant sound, hoofbeats, many of them. The Apache warriors reacted instantly, their formation tightening, their horses stepping into a silent combat stance. JR's blood ran cold when he recognized what Nanala had warned him about: 6 rough-looking riders approaching fast, their silhouettes jagged against the horizon, rifles slung carelessly across their backs. The kind of men who took advantage of isolated cabins and the lawless stretches of frontier. The outlaws slowed when they saw the circle of Apache riders, but arrogance pushed them forward. "Warning," one shouted in a taunting drawl. "Didn't know this dirt ranch belonged to the tribe now." Nanala answered coolly, "It belongs to the man who lives here. You may pass if you mean no harm." Her voice carried authority, but the outlaws laughed. "We don't take orders from painted riders," another sneered, raising his rifle slightly. It was a foolish move. The Apache responded like lightning, bows drawn, rifles lifted, every warrior ready. JR stepped forward instinctively, his voice trembling but determined. "Fellas, you don't want to do this." The leader smirked cruelly. "We want supplies. And we don't mind taking them off corpses." He started to raise his rifle fully, just as an Apache warrior loosed an arrow that struck the man's weapon, knocking it clean out of his hands before he could fire. The outlaws froze, stunned by the precision. Nanala raised her hand, halting her warriors from escalating further. She stared down the intruders. "Leave. You have moments before forces beyond your comprehension decide your fate." There was something in her tone that made even the outlaws hesitate. They read the room, saw the eyes of 20 warriors fixed on them with fearless resolve, and realized they were outnumbered, outmatched, and out of luck. Without another word, they turned their horses and rode off, dust trailing behind them until they disappeared into the desert hills. Silence settled again around the cabin, but this time it was filled with a sense of awe, tension releasing like a held breath. JR exhaled shakily. I don't know how to thank you," he said. Nanala gestured to the planted spear. "You already have," she replied softly. "What we did today was not repayment, it was balance." She explained that among her people, harmony was not created through grand gifts but through mutual respect, through the recognition that every human being carried a spark of the same breath of the Maker. JR had restored that harmony for her when he fixed her wagon without hesitation. Now her people had restored it for him in return. When the warriors finally rode off, one by one disappearing into the brush, only Nanala remained. She walked to the spear, touched it lightly, then looked back at him. "You may take this down when you wish," she said. "But know that it stands because you earned it. Not through strength, but through kindness." With that, she mounted her mare. "Our paths will cross again," she promised, though JR wasn't sure whether she meant it literally or in spirit. As she rode away, the sun glinted off the spear's feathers, making them shimmer like a promise carried by the wind. For the next few weeks, life returned to its steady rhythm, but JR felt different, not safer, though he certainly was, but connected, as if he'd gained invisible threads tying him to a larger world. Travelers passed and cast wary glances at the spear, choosing to continue without trouble. Some even tipped their hats in quiet respect. Word spread in whispers, the cowboy under Apache protection. But JR didn't flaunt it. He simply lived with deeper gratitude, knowing that a small act of humanity had rippled into something far greater than he could have imagined. One evening, as the sky blazed orange and purple, he carved a new handle for an old tool and thought about how close he had come to dying that morning. He wondered how many lives might have been changed if people chose compassion first instead of fear. A simple act, fixing a wagon wheel, had built a bridge over a canyon carved by years of mistrust. It had shown that kindness carries farther than bullets, and that respect can bloom even in a land soaked with conflict. Months later, on a cool spring morning, JR found a small woven basket on his doorstep. Inside were dried berries, a beautifully carved bone pendant, and a strip of leather marked with symbols he remembered from Nanala's clothing. The message was clear even without words: you are remembered. And JR, holding the pendant to the light, felt something powerful wash over him, a realization that compassion doesn't just mend wheels, it mends worlds. In the end, the lesson he carried for the rest of his life was simple but profound: one act of kindness, offered freely and without expectation, can echo into places and hearts you may never see. Sometimes it comes back to you in the form of 20 warriors standing between you and death. Sometimes it comes quietly in a basket left before dawn. But it always comes back. Because humanity, no matter how divided or scarred, still responds to kindness like a seed responds to rain. It grows. It heals. It connects. And so the cowboy who once stood alone in the desert came to understand something precious: that compassion is not weakness, but the greatest strength a person can wield. A strength that binds strangers, melts fear, crosses cultures, and turns enemies into allies. A strength that can turn a lonely cabin in the wilderness into a place protected not by walls or weapons, but by the goodwill of hearts he never thought would beat alongside his. And that truth, he realized, was worth more than all the rifles, fences, or gold in the world.